We're beginning Chapter 3, Organized Crime, the Business Model of Big Pharma, of Deadly Medicines and Organized Crime, by Peter Goetze. I know I'm butchering his name, but I don't know. Drug companies never talk about the benefits and harms of their drugs, but about their efficacy and safety. Words create what they describe, and the preferred semantics is seductive. It makes you think it can only be good for you to take drugs, as they are both efficacious and safe. Another reason why patients and doctors generally trust their drugs as being both efficacious and safe is that they think they have been carefully tested by the drug industry and carefully scrutinized by the drug regulatory agencies, using high standards before they are allowed onto the market. It's the other way around. In contrast to food and water, which are not only pretty harmless, but something we need to survive, drugs are generally neither efficacious nor safe. Paracelsus stated 500 years ago that all drugs are poisonous and that the right dose differentiates a poison from a remedy. Drugs always cause harm. If they didn't, they would be inert and therefore unable to give any benefit. For all drugs, it is therefore essential to find a dose that causes more good than harm in most patients. Even when we succeed with this, most patients will still not achieve any benefit from the drug they take. Although it is rather obvious that drugs can kill you, it is often forgotten by both patients and doctors. People trust their medicines to such a degree that the Canadian physician Sir William Ulcer, 1849 through 1919, wrote that the desire to take medicine is perhaps the greatest feature which distinguishes man from animals. A particularly amusing example is botulinum toxin, which is a neurotoxin produced by the bacterium Clostridium botulinum. It is one of the strongest poisons in nature, and a dose of only 50 ng killed half of the monkeys in a toxicity study, which means that 1 gram can kill 1 million monkeys. I wonder who needed this information so badly that it was worth killing our animal relatives to get it. And yet, what is this amazing killer drug used for? For treating wrinkles between the eyebrows? This comes with age, but you shouldn't be too old and have too much tremor when you inject the toxin, as it can be absorbed from the mucous membranes in the eyes and kill you. The package insert warns that deaths have occurred. Is it really worth running the risk of dying, however small it might be, just because you have wrinkles? Other questions that pop up are, can the drug be used for suicide or murder? Why was it even approved? The fact that drugs are dangerous and should be used with caution means that the ethical standards for those who do research on drugs and market them should be very high. I have talked to many people in the drug industry to find out what the companies think of themselves. And replies have ranged from very positive ones from people who were proud of the clinical trials they carried out to very negative ones. What is perhaps more interesting is to see which impression the drug companies want to give themselves to the public and to compare this with what they actually do. The Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America claim its members are committed to following the highest ethical standards as well as all legal requirements. Its code of interactions with healthcare professionals states that Ethical relationships with healthcare professionals are critical to our mission of helping patients. An important part of achieving this mission is ensuring that healthcare professionals have the latest, most accurate information available regarding prescription medicines. Here is another quotation. Under the heading Focus, Engagement, Honesty came this text. Our goal is to be the world's most successful, respected, and socially responsible consumer wear product. As you'll see shortly, the drug industry's actions have very little to do with honesty, respect, and social responsibility. How could they then write this about themselves? Well, they didn't. They could have, but the quotation comes from a newspaper advertisement from Philip Morris that shows a portrait of a smiling young woman who won't continue to look so good if she smokes. I'll tell you this to illustrate that not even the most deadly industry on the planet can resist the temptation of spreading bullshit while they increase the total consumption of tobacco because marketing is directly targeted toward teenagers in developing countries who have not yet started smoking. This marketing more than compensates for the decline in smoking in developed countries. How can it be socially responsible to deliberately kill millions of people every year who didn't need the product in the first place? People who have tried to smoke a cigarette know what I'm talking about. Aged 15, I only succeeded in smoking half a cigarette before I became so intoxicated that I vomited and left school to go directly to bed, as white as my sheets. My mother wondered what terrible disease had hit me so hard and told me later that she found half a cigarette in my shirt pocket. The disconnect between the drug industry's proclamations of highest ethical standards, following all legal requirements, and most accurate information available regarding prescription medicines and the reality of Big Pharma's conduct is also vast. The top executives' view of themselves, or rather the impression they try to convey about their activities, are not even shared by their own employees. An internal 2001 survey of Pfizer employees, which is not available to the public, showed that about 30% didn't agree with the statement senior management demonstrates honest, ethical behavior. In 2012, Pfizer agreed to pay $60 million to settle a U.S. federal investigation into bribery overseas. Pfizer wasn't only accused of bribing doctors, but also hospital administrators and drug regulators in several countries in Europe and Asia. The investigators said Pfizer units sought to hide the bribery by listing the payments and accounting records as legitimate expenses, such as training, freight, and entertainment. According to court papers, the company wired monthly payments for what it described as consultancy services to a doctor in Croatia who helped decide what drugs the government would register for sale and reimbursement. Pfizer didn't admit or deny the allegations, which is routine practice when drug companies settle accusations of fraud. Hoffman LaRoche, the biggest drug pusher. The 10 largest drug companies are all signatories to the U.S. Pharma Code, apart from Hoffman LaRoche Switzerland, which was the largest corporate fraudster worldwide in the 1990s, according to a 1999 listing of all industries, including banks and oil. High-level Roche executives led a cartel that, according to the U.S. Justice Department's Antitrust Division, was the most pervasive and harmful criminal antitrust conspiracy ever uncovered. Top executives at some of the world's biggest drug companies, largely from Europe and Asia, met secretly in hotel suites and at conferences, working together in a coalition they brazenly called Vitamins Incorporated. They carved up world markets and carefully orchestrated price increases in the process defrauding some of the world's biggest food companies. The Roche also, Larone, Roche alone had revenues of $3.3 billion in the United States while the conspiracy was running, and during that time, the conspirators gradually and artfully raised the prices of raw vitamins so as not to attract notice. They also rigged the bidding process. The Justice Department charged Kuno Sommer, former director of worldwide marketing, Hoffman LaRoche Vitamins and Fine Chemicals Division, with participating in the vitamin cartel and for lying to department investigators in 1997 in an attempt to cover up the conspiracy. Sommer pleaded guilty and got a 4-month prison term. After the conspiracy collapsed, those involved agreed to pay nearly $1 billion to settle federal antitrust charges, and virtually every big vitamin maker in the world was on the brink of agreeing to pay an additional $1 billion. Roche agreed to pay $500 million, equivalent to about 1 year's revenue from its vitamins business in the United States, and 2 executives were sentenced to prison terms of a few months. In Europe, the European Commission fined some of the world's biggest drug companies, including Roche, a record £523 million in 2001. It is surprising that the cartel could exist for so long, as Roche Insider blew the whistle already in 1973, which the European Commission acted on. Between the 2 world wars, Roche supplied morphine to the underworld. Other drug companies in the United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, Switzerland, and the United States also participated in the trade with opium, morphine, and heroin. The CEO of Roche in the United States, Elmer Bobst, had great difficulty persuading his superiors in Basel that they should stop their unethical business practice. Roche continued to ship narcotics to the United States behind Bobst's back, but he came across a cryptic telegram while visiting the headquarters which left no doubt that it came from U.S. criminals. It spoke about a shipment of sodium bicarbonate, which is used for baking cakes. Roche agreed to stop the trade when Bobst reported that the U.S. government had threatened to exclude Roche from doing business in the United States if the company didn't stop. However, Roche took up the habit again and again without telling Bobst. In his book, Bobst mentions that the man who was responsible for this wasn't at heart an immoral man, but utterly amoral in business. Bobst couldn't understand how it was possible to have 2 ethical standards, one for private life and one for business. He also describes how Roche avoided Swiss taxes by setting up a company in the tax refuge Liechtenstein. Pushing drugs that people don't need is a highly lucrative business, particularly when the drugs affect brain functions. Roche pushed Valium diazepam to become the top-selling drug in the world, although many indications for its use were highly doubtful and the wholesale price was 25 times the price of gold. In the early 1970s, Roche was fined by antitrust officials in Europe for engaging in anti-competitive behavior in the sale of Valium and another best-selling tranquilizer, Liberium, chlorodiazepoxide. It took 27 years after the first report about dependence had been published before the drug regulators fully acknowledged that tranquilizers are strongly addictive, just like heroin and other narcotics. I believe that the fact that some drugs affecting the brain are legal and others are illegal is irrelevant from an ethical perspective. If we try to understand what the drug industry is doing to the population, Another reason why the distinction is irrelevant is that the drug industry doesn't really bother whether their actions are legal or not, as illustrated by the pervasive use of illegal off label marketing. Furthermore, what is legal isn't static, but it can change with country, fashion, and prevailing beliefs. For example, narcotics haven't always been illegal, and although it's illegal to sell hash in most countries, it's legal to smoke hash in the Netherlands. It is sold in so called coffee shops, and this funny name once fooled me. Breakfast at hotels are exceedingly expensive compared to how little most of us eat in the morning. So I went into a coffee shop one morning in Amsterdam. The owner was very amused when I asked for coffee, which he didn't have. Shortly afterwards, three loving girls from the Middle East entered the shop and told me that the Black Lebanon was the best and that they were going to smoke just that. As another example of legal inconsistency for substances affecting the brain, it is illegal to produce your own brandy, but legal to buy it in a shop. Whatever the legal status of brain active substances, drugs are being pushed in both cases. After having examined the drug industry in great detail, John Braithwaite published his observations in the book Corporate Crime in the Pharmaceutical Industry. In it, he said, people who foster dependence on illicit drugs such as heroin are regarded as among the most unscrupulous pariahs of modern civilization. In contrast, pushers of illicit drugs tend to be viewed as altruistically motivated purveyors of social good. Hall of Shame for Big Pharma. The British Medical Journal comes out weekly, and most issues describe one or more scandals related to the drug industry in its news section or elsewhere. The New York Times also publishes many stories about drug industry misconduct, and most of the documentation I have collected over the years comes from these two highly respected sources. In recent years, numerous articles and books have described serious cases of research misconduct and marketing fraud committed by Big Pharma. But although facts are overwhelming, the standard response from the drug industry when a company has been caught is that there are few bad apples in any enterprise. And I have to come back to this.